Welcome back to part 2 of Mages and Sages interview with the Old Mage, with special guest Eric Boyd. In this segment, we're going to talk about how Ed came up with names in the Forgotten Realms, dwarven accents, rude gestures, a Tanari Lord, and even the grandfather tree. So please join us now for part 2 with special guest Eric Boyd. Curry, I think we got one for George here.
Oh, we always have tons for George. Let's see what we've got here. The one from Zero Morrow from Candlekeep. It says here, can you elaborate on the founding of Neverwinter, and if possible, reconcile the stories of Iger and Haweth Never?
I can, and the reason I can is because I'm not Ed, and he's probably going to say NDA, but I'm like,
yes. Go right ahead.
Perfectly free.
But I'm free to make stuff up, which is always fun. The question about Igestor takes me back 20 years when Eric, for the first time ever, emailed me out of the blue and said, do you feel like talking about Realms lore? Let's talk about the Fallen Kingdom and come up with some background history and lore to that place. And as part of the, unfortunately, never to see the light of day, Forgotten Realms Encyclopedia project that Stephen Shen tried to get off the ground. And that was 20 years ago when we first started mapping out the history and timeline for the North back in 1998.
Now you're making me feel old, George. I did not realize it was that long ago we started.
Hey, I worked on that encyclopedia.
Yeah,
Let's go back to your childhood.
And I remember when I first did a mock timeline weaving together all of the stuff that we were talking about, and I pointed out to Eric that Neverwinter was known as Igestor, which is an old FR5 Savage Frontier reference, which threw him no end, because you might not know this, but one of Eric's loves is what a city was called before it's what it's called now. One of his lovely things that he likes to pick out all the time. He did that with Kenston and Byzanta all the way in, say, long ago in other work. And so when I pointed it out, I remember him emailing saying, that's really cool. So Igestor has been around a long time. It's really
cool because it tells you a story. Because once there's a mismatch, now there's a reason it changed. Now you've got to find an event in history that explains why it's before and after. Just keeping the same name is boring.
I agree. And so when you see those types of references, it like Eric says, it creates stories. And the story of Igestor is linked into the story of Ilafan and its 3 sub-kingdoms, if you can describe it that, once Ilafan became no more in about minus 1100 Dale Reckoning. It's important to know, and I'm traversing way back into the history of the realms, but Ilafan has a very, very long history. It's around just after the formation of Aravandar. It's annexed by Aravandar. It's around a long time along that western coast of the Sword Coast, and its first iteration, when I look at the sources and the specific reference to it having a colony in what we now know as the Neverwinter Wood, where the Luer, I think I pronounced that wrongly, who are now the elves of the Moonshae Isles, were before they fled the Vaishan of Aravandar. It's really interesting that they call it a colony. It makes me think that the original Ilafan was in more southerly woods, which now Crypt Garden Forest and those woods, and that it used those northern woods probably as something else, a buffer between it and Aravandar, maybe a hunting ground. But it's also very interesting that Ilafan is described as a moon and a wood elf realm, and yet it's clear that the Lure elves, from all accounts and descriptions, appear to be gold elves. And I've always thought that they were gold elves who fled Aravandar, who weren't of the same mind as the Vaishan, and they sought sanctuary in Ilafan, which was always, or tried to be, Switzerland, and tried to stay neutral and out of the conflict of the Crown Wars. So we've got an original, more southerly Ilafan, and it's got a colony in what's now the Neverwinter Wood, where the Lure live until they flee. And then after the Vaishan are defeated, it looks like that Ilafan takes over all of that woodland slab across that western coast and has 3 sub-kingdoms, which the most northern one is the one that we're interested in respect of this question, which is Iliambruin. Now, after Ilafan ceases to be a unified realm in minus 1100 Dale Reckoning, Iliambruin goes it alone. It didn't have a coronal. It wasn't big enough to have that. It didn't actually have a single ruler. It didn't have a Laren law like the Elves of Ardeep elected. It had a council of noble elders that was known as the Shantanalar, which in a rough translation of the Moon Elven tongue is tree speakers. That's a term we've heard before. I've just added a bit of Elvish to it for fun. We like doing that. So 5 noble houses made up the Shantanalar, the houses of Ulbaeres, Gilius, Tarangor, Baralath, and the most important one, which was Neva. The importance of the Neva elves was this. It's after, we're talking around the time of the raising of the Standing Stone in the far-off Dalelands. It's clear at that time that the Elven realms all throughout Faerun are under pressure from humans, congregating around their woodlands. It's happening in Cormyr, where in 27 Dale Reckoning, the elves will effectively give those woodlands to the humans. It's happening around Cormanthir, where the Coronel Eltergrim is looking at opening up the woodlands to non-elves for the first time, despite significant opposition. And it's happening on the Western Sword Coast, with the elves of Iliambruin having the humans of Illusk just on their northern border. And the humans of Illusk have been around a long time. Netherese heritage, ruled by wizards, and a bit dark, and not the nicest humans going around. And you have to be in that far northern clime because you have to survive against all sorts of baddies, beasties, orcs, dragons, and all the bad stuff. Of course, to the elves, the humans were just as bad as the orcs and the dragons, but that's another story. We know from the sources that Iliambruin and Illusk had a war for a brief period of time, and then in -4 Dale Reckoning, they agreed on a pact which effectively set the River Mirar on their northern border as the border between the two realms, and they went into detente and stopped being in active conflict. The Nevas were elected, effectively chosen, tapped on the shoulder by the elves of Iliambruin and the Shantanalar to be the face of Iliambruin. They were to be the family that was to have ongoing contact with the humans, to deal with the humans of Illusk and the archwizards who ruled there, to deal with the other humans creeping up from the south. And we have to understand that at the time, the woodlands probably had retreated from the coast, and those coastal regions where we now have, Luskan and Port Last and Lylon and a whole range of other cities that we know in the modern realms, those weren't there in those times, but there were no doubt small little human enclaves, villages, fishing villages that sprang up despite elven opposition. Humans are good at that. They just keep creeping in.
You got realms like Uptower and Yarlith and stuff like that.
Yeah. And so at the time that the Shantanalar have elected the Neva elves to be the face of their realm in terms of dealing with the humans, they decide to build a castle, which is called Castle Neva, at the site of present-day Neverwinter. And that's where they have ongoing conclaves and meetings with the humans of the region as necessary. The humans of Illusk continuously pushing the boundaries, as it were, and engaging with the elves in relation to access to the woodlands, access to the coast, can our fishing vessels land on the coast if they need repairs, etc., etc. And all of those things needed dialogue and discussion. And then, of course, there were many humans who were fascinated by the elves and wanted to, contact them, learn from them, to use their counsel, and perhaps there were many, and I suspect there were many, who wanted to flee Illusk, didn't want to live under the wizards, rulers there, and so they, crept down into areas where the elves tolerated them to live, which was along the coast and outside of the woodlands. At the same time, you've got the Northmen who are coming from the islands of the Trackless Sea and the Rathim and other places, who are doing what we would probably best understand as what the Vikings of old used to do out of modern-day Scandinavia, and raiding the coastline, taking slaves, taking plunder, doing what they can. And of course, just like the Vikings, there are many Northmen who think, why should I, sail back to my windy, rocky, barren little island in the middle of the Trackless Sea when I can, stay here and build a home and on the coast, and it's far nicer. So to get back to the question, I've digressed a little bit. I apologise, but it's all background. It's all important.
So you only have to surface, George. There's a lot you didn't say.
Yeah. So we have this Castle Neva, which is built by the elves at the site of present-day Neverwinter. It becomes a focus of human interaction with elves in that time, and mostly those interactions are peaceful. But over time, the Nevas dwindle in number. There's not many left, and in 87 Dale Reckoning, some Northmen decide to take advantage of that. and led by one of their war leaders named Tarun. A massive fleet of longships, about 50 longships, come out of the trackless sea to raid Castle Neva, to take it, to make it theirs. The Neva elves give battle. There's not many of them left. 70 of them, dressed in shining mail, standing on the battlements, preparing their weaponry and prepared to fight to the death. Because Lord Halloweth Neva passed away by this stage. He was an old elf when he fought the wars 8 decades before. And he's buried now in the crypts beneath Castle Neva, as we know from the sources. And they're not going to give up their ancestors' burial place to the humans. But then a strange thing happens. Whilst the elves are in battle and, dying, giving more than they're getting, the humans of the surrounding region, the fisher folk, the villagers, who have had long interactions with the elves of the Neva, they join together under a human named Iga and come to the aid of the elves. They defeat the Northmen together. They burn their longships, drive them back into the sea, slay them all. But what are left of the Neva elves is a handful of elves, not enough to continue to reside in their former home. They go back into the forest to join their brethren, and Iga builds a small tower on a little hillock nearby to Castle Neva. Castle Neva is still considered at that time sacrosanct to the elves. They don't live in it, well, not for a while. Even humans aren't quite that brave. But he builds a little tower on a hillock, and it becomes known as Iga's Tor for the location, and humanity starts to cluster around that and Castle Neva, and eventually, over many years, that becomes the city that we now know as Neverwinter. And the name, people think, actually relates to the Neva elves, but it doesn't actually. The woodlands of Iliambruan were actually called Nothar, which is Nothaar to the elves, which is effectively best described as forests with no winter. The word for winter is oth in the Elven tongue. You put an N in front with an apostrophe, and it means the opposite. And the suffix AAR is usually used for woodlands, just like Aravandar. And the forest of no winter is because of the volcanic activity through the mountains that run through the Neverwinter Wood. So it was very temperate despite its northern latitude. So the situation is that the term Neverwinter comes from the name of the forest rather than the fact of the Neva elves. The fact that the two words are similar in the common and Elven tongue in terms of the family name, it's just one of those brilliant coincidences of the realms. So that's where it is. That's how Iga's Tor and the Neva elves came to be.
That's fantastic. Oh my god.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Difficult not to get lulled into story time with these guys. I mean, I totally forgot I was even participating in any of this. I was just completely caught up in that.
No, that was incredible. Eric, anything to add, or is what George said pretty good?
I thought George did an amazing job of telling that tale.
Yeah.
I guess what I would say is, Ed always has these delightful names for regions that just make them come alive. Like, I remember reading, I think it was Volo's Guide to the North is where the reference is. And before then, the Sword Coast north of Waterdeep, just it wasn't an area that spoke to me. There was nothing wrong with it, it just didn't speak to me. And then I remember reading, Ed named that strip of coastline the Frozen Far. And all of a sudden, there was something about that name that just made it come alive. And it's stuff like that.
Right.
When you catch a phrase that really gets you, like George was saying earlier, knowing that there were multiple names of Neverwinter, all of a sudden it's interesting. When you read a name here or there of Uthtower or Yarlith or any of those realms, and you're like, how does this all fit? And once you start thinking about how it fits, that's how you get to the point where you're like, oh, this is really telling me a story. And, the kind of story that George just wove there really comes from all the references that Ed and many other authors have sort of littered around and trying to knit them into a common story.
Right. No, that's incredible. And that's a great question for you, Ed. Other than just saying that you came up with these names and locations off the top of your head, is there any particular formula you used to come up with some of these names you used in the realms?
Initially, it's sounds that are cool, and then writing them in a way that doesn't look modern, that doesn't look real worldish, doesn't look like Smith or Jones or a recognizable spelling syllable from, say, German or Italian or French. So you want to and most of the ones that I fell upon for the realms. The spelling is almost Celtic as it happens, or almost Greek, one of the two. But that was a coincidence of my not knowing how else to express the sounds. Stepping outside the realms for 3 seconds. If you're naming your kids, you might want to do this, as in say the name you're happy with or settling on. Say it out loud a couple times. What cruel nicknames can be made from it? How will do that, and make sure you don't come up with something that you thought for 5 seconds was cool but isn't on reflection. So
let me say real quick, because you made me think of this. My oldest son's name is Dylan, after Bob Dylan. His original name was going to be Seth. Okay, and I love the name Seth until you put it with my last name, Seth Thetford. It sounds like you're lisping the entire time you say it. So it's really important that you take care in that.
Yeah, so that's how I started with some of the names, and then I did 2 things. Because remember, this is before D&D. This is a 5-6-year-old kid who's just writing for himself. Okay, and I wanted to do 2 things. I wanted to have a wide variety of names for places and people that sounded like they came from different backgrounds, so they didn't all sound the same. And the other thing was, I wanted some things to sound like they were related, that they came from the same culture, they came from the same speakers, but not everything. So, is there a secret? Is there a formula? Nope. But when I started out, that's the sort of thing I was doing. Again, just for myself. There was no game. There was, I'm just doing this for my own pleasure. And some of the results are, you sort of raise your eyebrows and go, okay, how drunk was he when he came in? And I assure you, that usually isn't the reason, because I was usually like 5 or 6 years old at the time. So it usually wasn't drink. Yeah, exactly. But no, some people seem to have a knack. I can't say I'm great or anything, because some people seem to have a knack for doing this and others don't. And for some reason, I have a knack for coming up with names for whatever reason. So I just go on doing it.
Well, it's incredible because they fit so perfectly in the areas. Like the term Underdark is simple. It's very simple. Underdark. It's underground and it's dark, but it fits perfectly with the stories that Bob wrote.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there are some that don't win the sweepstakes, so to speak, and we just don't think about them as much. So it's not. When the person says, I cannot take credit for this, it must have been God inspiring me or whatever.
Right.
I can't really take credit for it because some of them just seem to work. Others, not so much.
Well, take credit for the ones that did, at least.
Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's nice to have a win once in a while.
That's right. Hey, Kerr, we got a quick question there from Spike Murphy, I think.
We do, but I want to see if I can spin off on something from you guys.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
I want your opinion on this. Jeff does the absolute best dwarven accent you've ever heard, but we'll talk about that some other time. I want to know, in your opinion, because here are my 2 selections. If I were standing in front of Morden, does Morden sound like a Scot, or does Morden sound like a Viking? I've always had, in my mind, perceptions that dwarves sound more Nordic rather than Celtic or Scottish, and I wanted to get your opinion on that.
It could be Eric. It could be Eric or George too.
No. There's only one dwarf in this conversation.
That's absolutely true, Jeff. I'm not pointing any fingers.
Not pointing any fingers.
I'm not saying Ed. I'm not saying George. Certainly not me.
For me, it's always been a more Scottish sounding for some reason. And I think we talked about this before, but maybe it's a Hollywood impression that they've used them, like Lord of the Rings, when you have Gimli. Everybody sounds like they're from Scotland or somewhere near it. But the combination is probably better. But when you developed this, Ed, what was your take on how they would sound, or how Mordant would sound?
No, they're not Scots. Okay, no offense, because because that's a real world thing. That takes my mind back to the real world, and that's what I was trying to avoid always. But for me, they would be gruff, and I suppose that came to me from Tolkien, from my reading back then. So yeah, yes to gruff, no to Scots, because I don't want to be jolted into the real world. And I realized that the published realms, because TSR wanted it to be the unified game world for the second edition of the game, and so therefore they deliberately put stuff that is our real world analogs in it, like Karatur. They took away my original Moonshays and put in Doug's Albion campaign, which was, a stallion called Avalon, and castles that are Kaer this and Kaer that. But you see, to me, that feels like a mistake in style, because it feels like the real world. And then what that invites is being jolted at the gaming table out of your role-playing by, the rules lawyer next door to you at the table saying, yeah, but the stirrups weren't developed until the year, you see, and you've just been kicked out of your fantasy world. Intentionally or unintentionally, it's shattered the magic for a moment. And that's why I never wanted real-world analogs, which is a very long-winded way of saying I wouldn't want them to sound Scots. But they could certainly use some Nordic sounds, language sounds. They could also use some Gaelic, and there are a whole bunch of related old tongues there. And one of the things, if you look at the translations of the original texts that have come down to us, which of course were written later, the Elder Edda and so on, they have this wonderful cadence, which is crazy to modern English speakers of. With swords, they contended. Son of Snorri, fell he with many wounds. Next sentence, or next line, and you're going, huh? But you fall into this rhythm, and I would think that dwarves would have some of that these are not humans rhythm. But I don't want it to be, if it works for you at your gaming table because you happen to be Scandinavian and it feels right, fine, more power to you. But to me, I don't want it to evoke a real world historical or Hollywood quasi-historical thing if I can avoid it. So to me, I don't want them to be. But that's just my druthers, whatever works at your gaming table. And the usual Realms explanation for that, getting around different pronunciations, is that there are different regional pronunciations all over Toril. So, when somebody says, well, how do you pronounce this? How do you pronounce that? Is it Lolth, L-L-O-T-H, or Lolth, L-O-L-T-H? And you just say, different people do it different ways. The language is evolving. It's real. It adds that air of verisimilitude, as Poobah would say. It makes it seem real. So and besides, if you all your life have thought that it was drow to rhyme with row, not drow to rhyme with cow, I mean, I know it's drow to rhyme with cow because I happened to be at an early Gen Con where Gary was asked that, and he, for the 1500th time, gave the answer. But if it floats your boat to do it the other way around, and you always have, so go on doing it. It's a regional variation. Don't worry about it. There are far more important things to worry about. There you go.
That's not true, because you should hear some of the discussions that go on. You've probably seen them.
Because they care. Because they care
they do.
So much. Yeah. And they care so much about this imaginary creation that we've all put together, and I love them for it. But I'm just saying, you needn't deck the guy next door because he pronounces something a different way, I hope.
Well, you do if you're a dwarf.
Well, yeah, okay.
It reminds me of a story. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, was at a convention, and he kept referring to the fans as Trekkies. You know, we're all Trekkies. And one woman shouted, "No, sir, it's Trekkers." And he just looked at her and said, "Ma'am, I think I know what I'm talking about. I created it."
Yeah.
You know, so if you say it's trow or drow or you know, anything it is, the fans are going to go with that. It's the same thing we talked about before with Minza Baranzan and Minza Berenson. You know, it's Minza Baranzan, but you know, talking from Bob's aspect, it's Minza Berenson. But the correct, you know, so there is correct, and then there is a regional dialect that will change that.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Yeah.
And then actually I had a discussion with somebody about some of the stuff about Mithranor. They said, "How do you pronounce Mithranor?" And they kept giving these different pronunciations, and I said, "You know what, people, you're all right." And I said, because Ed said it really depends on where you're from.
Yep.
You know? Well, we haven't heard from Spike Murphy in a while there, Curry.
Okay, so he kind of uncharacteristically goes lowbrow with this one. Let's see if I can pull this up here. He says, from one of my players, "What is the Forgotten Realms equivalent of the middle finger?" And I'm sure this answer could go so many ways.
I already answered that for elves, and it's on Candlekeep. And let's see, I sent in the whole answer to that for the original Realms movie to TSR. They asked.
Really?
Oh yeah, because they wanted to have something that could be dirty but not dirty, because it wasn't one of our world rude gestures. So they could gleefully make it, because in those days you couldn't drop the F-bomb and you couldn't raise a middle finger, even for dramatic emphasis. And particularly not if you wanted a rating that would let a fantasy movie.
Right.
You know, the audience you were chasing. So yeah, I have actually answered all that. There are a couple of them. The one that is used in... Okay, I'll just give you the Cormyr and Waterdavian Noble one. Okay?
Okay.
You take your little finger and you stick it up your right nostril. Not all the way, just on the edge. And push your nose sideways. Like, push your nose, bend it with your little finger. So you're like bending your nose across. And then you take your little finger out and put it in your mouth. And then you...
What?
Then you take it out of your mouth and point it at the person. Like, you. That is the height of rudeness. Or was 2 generations.
I want you to know that I was following the instructions implicitly. I cannot, at this point, stick my finger in my mouth. I wanted you to know that.
I was doing the same thing.
Well, that's because you are modern, fastidious humans. And I can recall reading accounts of people picking their noses and eating it. Protein, if you were hungry enough.
God.
Oh, yes. And picking lice off themselves and insects from under their clothing and eating them.
Ew.
Ah, but you see, you're going, ooh. But it might not be in all cultures.
I guess if you're starving, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, right. It's protein, man. Free protein.
So is that what's used in Cormyr and Waterdeep?
Yes.
The same one? Okay.
Yeah, because there's cross-pollination between the noble houses. The rally horns are in both, remember?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, so because there have been intermarriages back and forth, and as families have gotten established back and forth. So one thing that they do, they either, if you have a break with a culture, like in our modern real-world historical, the American colonies of Britain split off, became independent, became America. They changed a lot of things deliberately, like the spelling of words and so on, to not do as our former brethren / overlords did. We're going to be different now. But if you don't have a cultural break like that, then many things would transfer, would be reinforced and picked up. And that's what I postulate happened in this case.
Okay, no. Great answer. Appreciate it. Curry, I think we have one for Eric now.
We do. This one comes from Matthew Brown, and it says, "Who was the Tenari Lord who tried to conquer Northwest Farron in the late 9th century, who warranted the attention of Illustriel, all of Illustriel's apprentices, Lynx and her lover Tolrin, which led to both Lynx's death and Lashtor's rise to power in Silvery Moon. Also, how stoked are you that Artur Morlin is back in the latest season of the D&D Adventures League?
That is a great question. Actually, they both are. Let me do the second one first, because it's a shorter answer. I was thrilled to hear about that. And in particular, every once in a while you see an artist and they're like, wow, how did they do that? That's like what I imagined, but so much better. And I saw a sneak peek of the Artur Morlin picture, I think on a Facebook page or something like that, and it was just so cool to see it come to life. He was such a fun character to create. For those who don't remember, I made him up as part of some of the early Fallen Kingdom work that George and I pulled together 20 years ago. Thanks, George. And then pitched to Dungeon as the Vampires of Waterdeep series, and it was a 3-part adventure on every single wacky aspect of vampirism I could come up with. But the coolest part of it was I had always wanted to know about the Dungeon of the Crypt and the fireplace level, and so I combined my having pitched a 3-part adventure to Dungeon on the Vampires of Waterdeep. Gave me an excuse to ask Ed to give me a few notes on the Dungeon of the Crypt and the fireplace level, and weave some, at least at that point, unpublished Realms lore from one of the original dungeons into a new adventure for folks to play with. So I had a great time with him. He also made a cameo in City of Splendor's Waterdeep. But the funnest part for him was my excuse to get Ed to tell me about the Dungeon of the Crypt. That's why I'm so thrilled to see him. He was always a great character.
Fantastic.
Ed, was there anything you wanted to add before I jump to the other half?
No, jump to the other half. That's great. Cool.
Okay. So the other half. So I am really impressed with the question because I had to Google it back to remember the answer.
Well, that's great.
So I never actually published the answer, but the guy Matthew Brown, I think that was the name, who wrote the question, wasn't just picking up on the little bits of Realms lore that we tucked into, I think it was Lost Empires, but actually, because the Lost Empires bit, I think it's Lost Empires, maybe it's Grand History, did not actually mention the Tenari lore, it just mentions that they rushed off. The only place you're actually, I think, going to find a reference to the Tenari Lord is one of the first articles that Ed got his start in Dragon. I got my start in Polyhedron, and there's a really, really obscure article back in Polyhedron 125 and 126 where I detailed Tolan of the Tent, and that's the only place that you actually see the reference to them rushing off to fight a Tenari Lord. So here I'm going to go on a little digression.
Oh no, we never do that.
No, it never happens.
I think it is, because I don't actually say in that article. So if you go back to the first edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, if you look in the monster manual, it says something like Type 1, Type 2, Type 3 demons, right, all the way up to Type 6. Mm-hmm. And then if you go into the appendix of that first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, after the names of the Type 6, 5, and 4 demons, they have a list of names. Yeah. So if you go back and you look at the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, in that appendix, under the Balor, for instance, there are 6 Balors named. One of them is Nadulu, who Ed wove into, I think it was FR4, the Magister supplement, in an obscure reference. One of them is Urtu, which I think Bob Salvatore is where he got his infamous demon there, and he wove up into his story. One of them, I'm trying to remember, I'm doing this from memory, I didn't quickly...
Tursoth.
Say it again?
Tursoth and Windene.
Windene, that was the one I was thinking of. Windene, we wove, I think it's over in, was it Champions of Ruin?
Yeah. We made him the Ilithiri one that corrupted the Ilithiri.
Yeah, that's right. And so we took each of those names and gradually gave them a story in the realms. There were others that weren't listed that also deserve stories, like Grinthark, who was put into Hellgate Keep in FR5. And one of the things I would say about demons, and to me, Demon Lord could just as easily be a Glabrazu or a Balor as much as it is a unique demon, is they're much more interesting if they don't just pop up in random parts of the realms, but if they keep coming back time and again, as if they're somehow like tied to the area that they are afflicting. So it's much more interesting when a demon comes back time and again. Some of the supplements like the Fiendish Codex Towards the Abyss that James Wyatt wrote talks about the demonic life cycle, and so I think it works much better as a villain or a story if a demon lord comes back time and again. So I'll go on another tangent here before I answer the question. So like George and I have been working on this Crown of Irlan adventure, which I talked about earlier before Georgia joined us, and we don't have one bad guy in that adventure. We have many bad guys, and the story sort of flows between them, with all of them having their stories. And one of the things that I've been finding fun is I created a new Balor in that adventure, Arkan Rathnor, the Thrice Spawned. And so this is the unnamed Balor that Stephen Shen first mentioned in Hellgate Keep, who spawned Saria Delar Dragath and basically kicked off the Daemon Fae, and after them the Faerie. And so he's unnamed in that Hellgate Keep adventure, but the question is, of course, where did he go? What happened to him? So George and I have been weaving him into the story, and so in this particular case, what we did with him is, yes, he was a Balor, and like all good kids, a few years later when it was convenient, this is back in the 4000s around the Seven Citadels War, negative 4000s around the Seven Citadels War, maybe even earlier. Lady Saria actually summoned her father and bound him to guard duty for 10,000 years or whatever over one of the Delar Dragath armories, and he served there for thousands of years until he was slain by his offspring, the Faerie, when they were trying to break back in, if I remember correctly. And so that was his first death. Then he clawed his way all the way back up the demonic hierarchy. I think he's a Glabrazu sorcerer at the moment. He clawed his way back up the demonic hierarchy, and he was the one who knew what was beneath the grandfather tree, for instance. He was the one who knew where most of the bodies were buried in the Northern High Forest. So he was the one who was selling that currency to other demons, the ones living in Hellgate Keep, who then sent Tanta Hargera, that's that Annis that we were talking about earlier from the Hag curse, sent her looking across the Northern High Forest to find the grandfather tree that she could never quite find. So, that's him coming back. He then eventually led the Blue Bear tribe, acting as their avatar, into another dungeon trying to reclaim some of the Vaishan war treasures, and got himself killed again. So now he's back in the new adventure, hence the Thrice Spawn, having once again clawed his way back up the demonic hierarchy, and he's back again. And so he's actually a fallen Balor who has been around a couple times, and he's the arch enemy of the Faerie and other demon-spawned elves. So just because they're his kids doesn't mean he can't hate them. So, but that kind of thing where you take a story and you bring a demon back time and again, as opposed to just going to random spots in the realms. The same thing we did with Wednesday. The same thing you could do with Nadulu, like Ed had started to do. The same thing Bob has done with Urtu. I think that makes the story more interesting. So getting back to the original question, who was that unnamed demon lord? The question is really, who do you want it to be? My first instinct is to look into Lost Empires. And there we built on a reference that was tied to FR5, the Savage Frontier, to a Nalfeshni named Zukathoth. And he's mentioned briefly as sort of having battled the Bay of Runlatha, who's sort of one of the ancestors of the Uthgardt barbarian tribes. And I think we had him in, if I'm remembering correctly, in Lost Empires. He died in a battle and was collapsed. The cavern was collapsed on top of him, and Zukathoth returned to the Abyss. So like any good demon, I doubt he just stayed there and said, I'll forget about the realms, but I'm sure he's come back time and again. So if I had to pick, that might be my first guess, because that particular demon, we don't really know what happened with his story after that, and that might well have been him having his hand back in the realms. Could be I'm forgetting a reference, and there's another story for him. But that's what I would do, is I would try to figure out what demons are tied to a particular area and have them come back again and again and again.
That's incredible.
You ever just get those answers that make your head spin because there's just so much content there? I'm trying to keep up and imagine and recall, and I'm like, oh man, Eric, give me a second. Brother, you're hurting my brains.
Google's your friend. You can find it all.
Oh my God, that was incredible. George, you have anything to add?
Not at all, but I think Zukathoth is a fantastic choice because we know he's got a history in the north, and we know that the Uthgard, whatever they are, that's Janelle Jacquet's creation, so we probably have to ask her what the pronunciation is. But the situation is that I think that's an awesome choice simply because we can track that demon's activities through the history of the north, and the time with Laeral brings you to Stornanter and Ilisk and other places. It's a great thread that can be teased out by anyone into a grand story. And who knows, with our next project, assuming we finish this one, Eric, we might go there and play with that a little bit.
That would be the next logical spot, would be to go west of the High Forest.
Yeah.
Yes!
That's a resounding yes, I think so. Wow. Okay, so Ed, I got one for you here from AJ at Candlekeep. He says, in the Spelljammer supplement SJR1, Lost Ships, one of the delightful personalities you get to meet is Sharangar Zeltun.
Mm-hmm.
Any relation to Maher Zeltun of the Watchful Order?
Yes.
Can
Okay.
I just interject that was a brilliant question. I never caught that tie, and I was so thrilled to see that question come in.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
I wish I could. That's NDA.
Oh.
Because that was a thing. That was a thing that was going to be a spin-off project that never happened. But the NDA is still in place because it could happen. I highly doubt it will happen because the people involved are no longer at TSR, which no longer exists, and they're now doing other things. But I would somehow have to. Okay, next time I'm in Seattle, I will take certain people drinking or go to dinner with certain people and try and see if I can get their permission to shed light on that, because I don't even think anybody on staff at WotC has that one on their NDA list because of its nature. But yeah, it is. You see, anything that was accepted by the company and I was paid for doing is NDA.
Right.
Because it's lore that they've bought and paid for, they own, and they could reveal at any time. And when you think, yeah, that'll never happen after all these years, it's amazing what old lore has been resurrected recently, and people have said, hey, we could do something with this, and they do.
Right.
Okay, I'm posting
Does it mean the
group right now. There is going to be a GoFundMe put up for buy a beer for the lorekeepers.com. We're going to figure this out. We're going to make this happen.
Well, I think we should send Eric then. He probably has a better ability to keep his head with several beers.
So I think what you should do is every time I have to say NDA, start a list of NDAs. And then let's see if we can try and get a bunch of them dropped like a curtain.
Oh, geez, Ed, do you know how many there's been already?
I know. Yes, I know.
I have to go back through hours and hours of content and
I
start
know.
counting and writing. Okay.
But I actually thought Ed was.
Gotcha.
I thought Ed was going to suggest a drinking game where every time he said NDAs, we had to chug.
Yeah, sure.
Wait a minute. I thought we were playing that.
Eric's already started.
Oh, okay.
I started a long time ago.
Hey, no fair, you got a head start. I'm going to have to start two-fisting it now.
That's what
That's
she
all
said.
chant. NDA.
That's what she said. Thank you. I was waiting for that.
So does that mean the rest of the question's kind of moot when he says, is she indeed from Greyhawk, or is the phrase the last surviving member of a long ago adventuring band? Can't answer that either.
Let's just say that the original idea for a high-level campaign, and it became the epic level handbook and got sort of twisted.
Hey, we did that one.
Yeah, was that if you got to be a certain level in D&D at the time, the edition of the game that was current at the time was a little broken for the higher levels. You know, they could easily stomp just about everything, unless the Dungeon Master got really nasty with tricks and traps and so on, or just wore them down by having them on a never-ending dungeon crawl where they were getting hit and couldn't memorize spells and couldn't sleep and couldn't, otherwise they could take just about everything. So the logical thing for high-level characters to do was to go planewalking. That's where your high-level campaign would be. And that's what they turned into the epic level book, because it was like, let's get a product line out of this. And it turned into Planescape as well. But originally, it was like we were supposed to seed examples across published TSR works of all sort, not just the Realm stuff, of adventuring bands that had gone all over the place. And to just show everybody, without saying a word, to show everybody it could be done, just by providing examples. So it would plant the seed in people's minds. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did that, And that's one of the examples.
Well, it's okay. Hence the portals and Planescape, and you're able to jump from world to world.
Yep. And you might remember, those of you who have been reading Dragon long enough, Dragon 37, From the City of Brass to Dead Orc Pass. Not my title, which was my gates in D&D, and that's the job that got me contributing editor job at Dragon, because Kim Mohan wrote me a letter saying, I am so impressed. I have never received an article with footnotes before. But yeah, that's what fascinated me, because it was where I thought high-level campaigning would inevitably go.
Not everybody did all their thinking in footnotes, Ed.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what I always do.
Yeah.
Well, Eric, I got one here for you from Daelor Darden from Candlekeep. With so many great elven civilizations in and around the High Forest, where did all the ruins go? Are the elves simply that good at dismantling civilizations that took them hundreds of even thousands of years to create? And if they're that good at it, how do they do it?
So I'm hoping Ed will jump in here too, but I can give a brief answer and then see what Ed thinks. So first of all, I'm not sure they went anywhere. This goes back to our earlier conversation about me making an analog between the High Forest and the Underdark. It is so removed and strange that it's really another world. There could be whole cities in the High Forest that are just sitting there, and you could live 1,000 years in the north and never stumble across them. There are more cities than were laid out in the original, the Savage Frontier, FR5, that, again, Ed kind of sprinkles like fairy dust. One of my favorites is Lothan of the Silver Spires. I think that came from the Atlantean campaign article in Dragon 227, if I'm remembering correctly. And I think we talked about it maybe in Lost Empires, I can't remember. But George and I have been playing with that one, and to me, that one is an example of one that's still there. It was a beautiful Gold Elf city. It was part of Saluvanid. Not necessarily the nicest place to visit if you weren't a Gold Elf. It's still there. The ruins are occupied by orcs of the High Forest, particularly there's a little-known orcish kingdom in the Southwest High Forest called Gerakdar. The orcs in the Southwest High Forest are led by sort of a variant of Fey-Touched, if you know the 3rd edition Fey-Touched race, that are sort of the offspring of orcs and a debased master of the hunt, who's kind of a Celtic-like horned figure, that Fey, that leads stags through the forest. So, that's an example. There's a city right there. It's filled with orcs. They actually have I think it's called the Bloodbone Throne of Earth, which actually comes from an orc kingdom by hook and by crook that was in the Sword Mountains as their throne. And then, of course, hidden underneath the city, it's a secret base of the Kovariande, who are the current organization of the Feyre, seeking to retake the High Forest. So, that's an example of a city that is not well known across the north. There are many lost cities across the north that people have completely forgotten about. It has all sorts of interesting history and ties to all sorts of the history of the north, but you could just walk right past it because just like the Underdark, the High Forest is such a great, amazing place that you would just never know it was there. There are other little cities or towns or villages as well. One of the ones and George has been playing with is called Carol Dairn. It's on the Unicorn Run. It sits on the right outside the gates of the Stronghold of the Nine, and I'm going to mention this because he's such an amazing artist. There's a fellow named Christian Steele who I met on the Cartographers Guild website, and he's been helping George and I detail Carol Dairn, and he does some really amazing maps. And this particular village sits over the Stronghold of the Nine, is, at least the way George and I have envisioned it, is really a very unique structure. So, I always wondered, where did the grandfather tree come from? It's kind of an elder treant, and why aren't there more of them? There's an ancient elven word called an Arakor, which stands for, it's sort of the name of one of these elven treants. And the elves of ancient Arivandar would summon them to stand over really, truly ancient evil sites. And we all know the grandfather tree, which may be the last Arakor in existence, but there's at least one other one, or there was one other one, in the High Forest until an ancient cloud giant king chopped it down. And that tree stump is actually on the banks of the Unicorn Run, and the Stronghold of the Nine is actually a dwarf hold underneath that giant tree stump filled with beads of amber and all sorts of monsters. And Carol Dairn is the elven village that sits sort of on the roots of this giant stump. And Christian has been making some amazing maps, and I can't wait to show people what it looks like. So that's an example of sort of a smaller elven village. In Son of Thunder, we learned of Ghost Stand, which is where the Tree Ghost tribe hides out next to the grandfather tree. And it's a bunch of elevated platforms way up in the trees that look out towards the heavens. In the northeast High Forest, there's Tuivia Manthar, which is more commonly known as Tall Trees, and that's the ancient capital of Irlan. And the elves actually are still living there along with the druids, and that's where the effort to rebuild the elven kingdom in the High Forest is currently happening. There are other ancient cities, I'm not going to pronounce this one right, like Milaninar, which is the temple city of the elves, which is occupied by the green dragon, I'm going to get it wrong, Chloracadika, I think is how it's pronounced. And she, say it again?
Chloracridera?
Yeah, that's it, thank you. I'm going from memory. And she has sat in the temple city of the elves and kept them from going there for generations as well. So there's literally just all these elven cities all over the place throughout the High Forest that you could walk right by and never even notice that you're there. It's not like walking by, if Waterdeep was in ruins, you would notice it as you walk down the high road. In the depths of the High Forest, you can literally slip by them and not realize what you've seen. So that's kind of my take on it, but I don't know, Ed, you might have a different take.
No, that's dead on with one addition.
Now I want to hear this.
No. Humans tend to think that everybody builds cities their way, unless you're in the Underdark. They understand that, hobbits, halflings like to dig, dwarves like to dig, gnomes like to dig, but anybody who's civilized, we build like this, and these tall things, and there's walls, and there's cobbled streets, or muddy streets, but you'd like to get them cobbled, and you build higher because you've got limited space and real estate becomes valuable, and this is the way cities are built. And what they don't realize is a lot of the forest creatures, including notably the elves, they want to live with the land. They want to get back to the land. They don't want to be heavy on the land. So increasingly, their architecture is stuff that humans don't realize. We all sort of think and then dismiss, oh yeah, they live in living trees, got it. Yeah. But I think most humans don't realize the extent to which the elves are blending with the forest. They aren't building buildings the way humans do. So a human might miss the fact there is a large, thriving community there because it doesn't have stone buildings, tiled roofs, or slate roofs, or thatched roofs. It has growing roofs instead. So everything looks like it's growing as opposed to carved out of the forest.
Absolutely.
I have to put up a guilty hand here, because I suspect that Dalla Darden's question arises out of a bit of realms lore that I was absolutely forced to come up with. And that is, we know that where the site of Waterdeep is, and we know its history in terms of its human presence and its dwarven presence, thanks to Ed's writings on the Malacan dwarves. Many moons ago on the, I think might have even been still TSR then, but definitely WotC, the website did an article series called Perilous Gateways, which was about a whole range of portals around Faerun. And one of them was Song Paths of Ilafan, which is Eric and I in our recent work have wrestled with a little bit. And in one of those web articles, it was very clearly stated that Ilafan's capital was at the site of present-day Waterdeep. That caused me a little bit of consternation as I was mapping out the history of the North in conjunction with Eric, and in the end, my only solution was to say, yes, that was absolutely right. I gave it a name, Aelintaldar. Then I got rid of it by use of the high magic ritual set out in the Cormanthea sourcebook that Stephen called Netel Ora, which is very badly translated as corrosion erosion, which is effectively using the weave to recreate natural forces that cause a concentrated area to be eroded and go back to what it first started with, which is basically just dirt. And I thought that made sense in terms of there being no real sign of any elven architecture or elven tree buildings or anything like that, because it did make sense that there would be no mention before of any elven ruins or any indication of the elven presence. Of course, there was one wonderful thing that Eric then built into the location because of that prehistory, which was the missile that exists in Waterdeep, which there's a couple actually, but there's one that prevents all of the catacombs and tunnels and the beehive that is under mountain from basically collapsing in and of itself and destroying the city. So I remember Eric latching onto that idea and saying the elves basically put in a missile which stabilised the plateau and made sure that the dwarves could keep delving away and handing out some mithril to the elves every once in a while to keep them happy, whilst not undermining the bedrock of the area where they were all living at the time.
See, I thought you were going to talk about the mythal that I liked, or the epic spell that I really liked for Waterdeep.
The Draco Rage mythal.
The Draco Rage mythal to keep the dragons out from attacking the city. That also got to weave in Ed's Dragon Mage of Waterdeep Marrow, which I'd always wondered, why is he such a key player if he's evil? Yet Kelvin seems to get along with him at least a tiny bit. Yeah, I'm probably mischaracterizing that relationship, but at least that's the sense I got, was that, yes, he's bad, but he's got a role. And,
yes.
So weaving him into the mythal that lets some dragons in, but not infinite, was always a lot of fun for me. That going back to the question about Artur Morland, that was another one. If you build a city like Waterdeep, and then you start looking through the monster manual, you're like, how is this city even here? It's just like a refrigerator waiting for the monsters to stop by. And so coming up with cool and interesting reasons why, there's only the Xanathar really dominating the city as a beholder. There's only Artur Morland really dominating as a vampire. Why hasn't a dozen red worms just taken over the city and gone to town? You've got to, in a world like the Realms, you've got to kind of think through that. And when you do, it allows you to tell really interesting stories. I think we wandered off topic, but I wanted to talk about that mythal too.
It's never off topic when it's talking about the realms. No. Again, you got another one here. Actually, this is Eric and George. But I want to ask George first, and Eric, you can chime in. This is from Dazzlertle from Candlekeep. I love these names. His question is about, was it Delimber, the city?
Delimber.
Delimbir.
Delimbiran, I think it's supposed to be.
The city is Delimbiran, yeah.
Since it was destroyed in a huge magical explosion, and one would imagine that it would become a famous dungeon, much like Hellgate Keep, but thus far it's relatively unknown to us. Is it the case that Delimbir is not known outside the Shining Vale, and if so, why?
You want to go first, George?
Yeah. The answer is that Delimbiran was certainly a city, and it was the capital of the kingdom of man, but it wasn't a Waterdeep type city. It wasn't a massive, big, sprawling city that one would see in the modern day realms. The bottom line is cities in those days were far smaller, especially in the wild hinterlands of the north and the Sword Coast. So it wasn't, when we say city, it was a city by the standards of those times, but it wasn't a huge, massive thing like Waterdeep is today. We had that city, and we decided to burn it down for fun. No, we had the reference in the Corminthir Accessory and Fall of Mithranor by Stephen Shen, which talked about the Warrior's Gate, which was a link between Mithranor and the Delimbir, and we decided to put that gate within Delimbiran, the capital city, and we thought that when that gate basically was destroyed from within, that it caused some bad effects, and effectively it was a massive wildfire which raged through the city and burnt down all the structures. And again, we have to think that not all the structures were stone. There would have been a lot of wooden housing. It was around forest lands, woodlands. Much of the city wouldn't have been massive stone buildings or towers, and so all of that that wasn't built of stone went away. We then had, that's in the early 700s Dale reckoning, and I'm sure that what was left of the city continued to have a human population of sorts for a period of time, but it just wasn't the capital and it wasn't significantly populated. But then we had a pretty horrific thing happen to that remaining little settlement, which was in about 947 Dale reckoning. We managed to pick up a little, again, this is back from 1998, Eric. Again, you're going to make you feel old. In our Fallen Kingdom musings, we asked Ed for a few things that had happened in the area and region way back then, and he came up with this dragon fight between the silver dragon Teskuladar, Many Talons, and a white dragon whose name is just probably Ed's best. I'll try my best here. Kortul Oru Lagalagas is the best I can come up with, and I can only say that with a Celtic accent because that's the only way it came out.
Kortul Oru Lagalagas.
So 947 Dale reckoning, those two massive dragons have a fight in the skies over the Desserin Valley, and the Teskuladar, the silver dragon, wins, and the remnants of this massive white dragon just come and crush down into the city. Unfortunately, at the same time, the Duke of Kalendor, which is effectively the precursor to the Duchy of Daggerford that we know so well in the modern day realms, had taken shelter in the ruins after seeing these dragons freewheeling over the area and causing mayhem and destruction. And he died in that destruction when that white dragon corpse just smashed down on the remnants of what was left of the buildings of Delimbiran. So that occurred in 947 Dale reckoning, and then about 3 decades later we had a very important event occur, and also shortly after that destruction another important event occurred, which was the construction of Castle Daggerford just down the road. And then about 30 years later we had the construction for the first time of Waterdeep stone walls. Where did all that stone come from? I suspect, in my view, is that a lot of it came from the ruins of Delimbiran. Those stones were taken downriver to construct Castle Daggerford, and then many were taken after that by industrious people to help build the walls of Waterdeep. So that's probably why there isn't any massive ruins there for people to investigate. There'd probably be still some underground ruins, no doubt. Many cellars and little passageways and small little catacomb passages would still exist. But above ground dwellings and massive stone buildings and ruined towers and things like that, I think all of that stone went to build Castle Daggerford and the walls of Waterdeep. And I suspect that might have even been the dwarves of Dardath, one of our favourite dwarven kingdoms in that area, who made some gold in the process, because I suspect they might have taken the opportunity to shift that stone and help in the building, especially of Waterdeep's walls.
So
George, wasn't Castle Daggerford built before that battle between the two dragons?
I don't think so. Not on my
947 Dale Reckoning.
Yeah, well, that was when that big smash occurred. So
I'm sorry. It is. You're right. It's right after that. It was. I'm sorry.
Don't argue with George on history. You'll never win. I would say, though, that George left out a couple secrets in what he said. So, first off, you know those fools, I mean, people who built Castle Daggerford literally on top of the ruins of Archer Moreland's castle? You would think that, you know, if suddenly you decide to not live where you used to have your city and build a new city right on top of the vampire's old castle, that might tell you something, and the rest of the people who are carrying the stones up to Waterdeep, I mean, Archer Moreland's hunting ground for I think 1,000 years. I'm not blaming anybody here. I'm just pointing out, you know, a couple things did happen that maybe seem a little bit unwise. The other thing I would point out, if you're looking for ruins, and I'm going to go off on a tangent here, there's a ruin nearby that Ed created called the Endless Stair. I think that's the name of it. I might be confusing it with the CM8 module that Ed also wrote that I always just mentally put in the realms. I think that's the right... Am I remembering that right, Ed?
The Endless Stair is the D&D module. But yes, the one there is the Crumbling Stair.
Thank you. I always think the two of them in my brain. But anyhow, so if you think back to Elenbar, which was the predecessor realm, which was the first humans, they were Eldath worshippers, they hung out with the elves of Ardeep, and they built all these wondrous towers in the open lands between Ardeep and Dardath. They built towers that, when they vanished, they still left these rooms that you could get to by, like, I have this image of, like, you're out on a moor, and you see like 5 or 6 stairs and some twinkling lights, and you start climbing up those stairs, and suddenly you're in like this ethereal room. And so one of the thoughts I always had when the Warriors Gate exploded, well, first off, the part I would add to what George was saying is, you know, we always think of portals and what do they do to trade. You know, if you could control both ends of a portal, how much money could you make? You know, how much gold could the merchants have because they had the trade between two far distant realms? The downside is what we were trying to show with the explosion of the Warriors Gate, is just how dangerous it is to effectively have that giant bomb in the middle of your city if it goes boom. But one of the side effects I always thought could have also happened, in addition to the wonderful lore that George was just saying, is that some of the ruins, just like the Crumbling Stair to the north from Elenbar, could be still there, but more ethereal, more ghostly rooms that you can only get to by walking up certain steps that may not even be there anymore. So you might have to pile and build your own steps, and you're walking up into empty space, and suddenly you're in a hidden room with who knows what kind of undead just lurking and waiting, probably watch ghosts and all sorts of treasures that date back hundreds if not thousands of years. So I still think, even if it looks like a big grassy open plain, the road just goes through with no evidence of a city, there's still plenty of ruins that could be there hiding around sort of the corner.
I like that Ghost Ruins. That is fantastic. I could get into that. That's really good.
Yep, I agree. Yes.
See how much fun? This is why George and I take 20 years to write something up.
Well, I don't know if you've told everyone already, but we did spend the last 3 days working out a calendar.
Yes, we talked about it.
That's for an ancient realm long gone.
No editor and no page count.
Is this the calendar that we've been hearing all the rumors about? You guys putting on the different sexy cosplay, taking pictures. You guys are a different
month. That's the other calendar.
Oh.
That's I'm giving to Ed.
Oh.
The clerics of Sahanin are much tamer than that. Well, maybe not.
My favorite fest halls by city.
Ahem.
Okay, Curry, I think we should move to the next question by Lorenzo Trebi.
I mean, if you insist. We've got the majority of the Ed Babysitter team here on this call tonight, so for that I'm happy. I mean, the idea that we're acting this civilized, this adult in this group is truly impressive. But here's the question. Let's see. Lorenzo Trebi says, for Ed and Eric, George, if you want to jump in, you'd like to know more about the isolated inns located outside the cities or villages. Specifically, how common are they in lands like the Dale lands and Cormier, and generally in other lands? How are they organized? Can each quality reach that of those in the city? Is it possible that in some lands these can be frequent enough to allow you to trade horses every hour, so that you always have fresh ones to cover great distances? Wow, there's a whole lot of information there. Let's just start with that. What do you guys got to say about that?
Okay, here we go. Okay, wayside inns are very common in farmland and settled areas of the realms, and along major trade routes, the ones you see on the maps. Except in the most hostile wilderland terrain, they can always be found a day's easy ride apart, which is about 10 to 12 miles. Okay? Now, what that means is you can't trade your horses every hour or so. You can trade them every 3 to 4 hours if you have the money and there isn't a heavy demand. In other words, there aren't a whole bunch of travelers ahead of you on the same road going in the same direction that have exhausted the supply of fresh horses and just left their traded in mounts behind. So you're getting exhausted or lame or, weary horses. In towns and cities, there are also always stables. Like, I don't mean a stable attached to an inn or a stable attached to a house or a palace. I mean a business that is a standalone stables, and these stables sell or swap mounts in addition to the stables at inns. So unless it's spring breakup or just before fall close down, which is like the massive travel season in the realms, okay? Just like March break is up here in Canada, spring break, whatever, the Easter and Christmas halls are in Britain, where all sorts of people are on the move. Thanksgiving and Christmas in the United States, when everybody tries to use the airports to go visit family. Okay, the Realmsian equivalents are spring breakup, when the roads are solid enough and the snow and ice is gone so you can travel, and just before fall, when everybody knows winter's coming and the roads are going to become impassable and everybody's trying to get where they want to winter over or rush one last cargo at inflated prices to wherever they can get it to. Those are the rush hours, okay? So unless it's one of those two times, or unless war is imminent, or there's some other unusual heavy demand for mounts and beasts of burden, and one such demand would be if a local ruler is trying to muster and equip a new force, okay? Or a caravan coster, a new one is starting up, or an old one has suffered heavy losses due to disease or a disaster, and they're trying to buy up all the mounts and all the beasts of burden in a local area in a hurry to remount themselves. If none of those things are happening, you as a traveler can usually get remounts, as in reused horses, or buy new. Exchanges will cost a minimum of 3 gold pieces and up, depending on the season, demand, competition, and locale. Tethir and Sembia are always more expensive than the Dales, for instance. Okay? So the going price is just higher in some areas. And as for the quality of the inns, well, it's like this. Many inns thrive and last under the same ownership because they're superb. And by superb, I don't mean luxurious, as in hoity-toity, as in high prices, as in, costume doormen and so on and stuff. I mean, good beds, good safe food, warm, they look after your mounts, you don't have to worry about your stuff being stolen, and you're not going to get little creepy crawly things all over your body because you slept there. Those sort of inns last. Human nature applies in the realms as in our real world. There are some isolated inns that are the only game in town in the middle of a mountain pass or whatever, and they can be wretchedly bad because they can be bad and still stay in business because it's that or die. So people will come in. But again, a really badly run inn is an opportunity for a merchant to say, I could really make a lot of money here if I turned this around into something special. So if they have enough money or can borrow enough money or can call on co-sponsors because they're already part of a guild, a merchant's guild or a coster, They go to the innkeeper and say, "You tired of running this inn? Because I'd love to buy it from you." Or they catch them when there's sickness amongst their staff, or a family member has just died or whatever, and they say, "Would you like me to take over here? I'll pay you this much." So the person doesn't have time to jack the price up. So they would tend to buy the inn and take it over and improve it. So yes, there are tons of inns in civilized areas, farmland, and well-policed communities that don't necessarily make it onto the maps. When you're out on the trade roads, far away from kingdoms, realms, then you're going to have the inns at least a day's ride apart, and in probably some areas more, and in some dangerous terrain less. Nobody wants to live too near the marshes of Tun, because it's like Insect City. They go up your nose, they go in your mouth, they go in your eyes, they go in your ears, they crawl all over your body. You don't want to be near there. And of course, in the middle of winter, it's frozen like everywhere else anyway. So, you see? So, but right. But in general, yes, the wayside inns are the lifeblood of the realms. For in terms of travel, because literally what makes the realms the sort of almost Renaissance, not just medieval era that it is the trade. The fact that we have energetic merchants of all sorts of races that are linking the world together and moving goods around, and we know that from all of the published realms lore. Anyway, it's sort of a given that there are good inns, good roads, energetic caravan merchants everywhere, and everybody benefits thereby.
Okay, so this could be argued as a Realmsian flippable real estate. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Ed, didn't you, like in the early Dragon 300s, I'm trying to remember, and I can't forget.
Yep.
You one in your Elminster's Guide series?
Yeah, he did. I've got it right here. Number 288, which is the Moon with an Inn.
Yeah,
that's it. I was thinking of. Yep.
Yeah.
That would be an example of one that would be perfect, right?
Yeah, that would be a really good one. Yes.
Its very first sentence of that article is "Inns are vital in the Sword Coast North," but that article is actually brilliant for one of the best oaths I've ever seen in all of Realms lore, and I have to repeat it for this podcast, which is, "By the blasted blue dangle pipe of Longjaws the Dragon."
Yeah.
That's how you curse in the realms.
That's how you curse. That's the middle finger.
Exactly.
Those are the ones that the editors let go into print. I get way more colorful than that, and they tone them back.
I don't believe it, and I can't believe you get any more colorful.
I think it's an important point to understand that there's more to the realms than just what's on the map. The map gives you an understanding, a guide to what is definitely out there. But there's so much in the space in between that gives people scope to put in whatever they want. In that same article series, you have a gambling house a couple of days' ride outside of Waterdeep, which would be a fantastic place to have adventures in, etc. There is so much in the blank map that can be filled in for anyone's campaign, and it always fascinates me when you hear people say, "Oh, the Forgotten Realms is too detailed. There's just so much information. There's no room to do anything yourself." And I think to myself, there's tons of room. You could pick a corner and make it your own and fill it with everything: villages, towns, whatever you want, dungeons. And it's an absolute fallacy that the realms is so full that there's no scope for anyone's individual campaign.
Yes, I agree. And I tend to think of people who think that about the realms. They're not appreciating the physical scale of the bit they're looking at, and they're sort of like those people I used to encounter in 1960s America when we were driving, in your merry Oldsmobile across the brand new interstates. Eisenhower just, started the system of being built, and they were saying, "Oh, there's, we drive from Chicago to New York, and there's nothing in between, nothing." And you think, yeah, right.
Well, there's a bunch of states.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would agree with that, because, if you looked at the first edition Realms maps and you looked at the long stretch that went from Waterdeep to Baldur's Gate, it looked so long and so empty. But then, as George and I were having fun with, in the Shining Vale, honestly, the Shining Vale is not that big. It's, it's our deep forest down to Dragonspear Castle and it's the coast over to Seacomber. I mean, it's a tiny area, and yet we filled 300 pages with that. And there was plenty of room for more, anything the DM could want to stick in. Just go a little farther, go over another hill, and you have a whole other area. There is just so much space in the realms to try to put whatever you want. Just because the words are close on a map, because the words are written in a big font, doesn't mean that's not a vast distance with hundreds of stories.
No, and I think it's their ability to imagine that. It's like the Hubble Space Telescope, and they found an area of space not too few years ago that was just dark, and they said there's nothing there. They pointed the Hubble telescope there, and they came up with over 2,000 galaxies that you couldn't see. So if you look at the realms in that same aspect, they're looking at it with a faraway eye. They need to look at it with more of a micro, so they get down there and see exactly what's there in each area.
It's called eyes of minute seeing.
That's it. That's it. I forgot about that. Curry, is there any more to part to that question?
There is. Let's see. This is going to be challenging because of pronunciation. I'm going to do my best with the second part. Okay. He also asks, he would like to know more about Yachtu Svim.
Yachtu Svim. Yachtu Svim.
Yachtu Svim. And in particular, he's very curious about the duel with Storm that's mentioned in the Seven Sisters, and he hopes that it's not NDA.
Oh yeah, it's NDA.
No, of course it is.
Actually, a lot of Zvim lore is NDA.
Wait,
so
everybody drink. Everybody drink.
So I'm hoping Eric or George have some lore that is not covered by NDA that they can share, because there's very little I can say about Yachtu Zvim because of certain plans that were afoot at TSR.
Yeah, I always thought he was interesting. You remember earlier in this conversation I said if we'd put one stat block in for a god for you to fight, that's who you would fight. Because to me, he was sort of halfway between a god, because he's a god's son, which always made me think of, not that he's the same, of course, because his parentage was a little different, but the demigods of the Greek pantheons that are sort of mortal and are wandering around. Mm-hmm. To me, he was more, in the realms that I would play, you would never meet the avatar of Bane or the avatar of Cyric or whatever it might be. But he's the type that you would meet. He's sort of halfway between that god and mortal. He's tangible enough that you could really see him. There was a lot done in the early days of the realms with the Avatar trilogy as they went from first to second edition, which had very good points. But I often felt like, if only that had held off a few more years, if only we'd gotten 5 years to play in the first edition realms before any products had come out that had sort of radically altered it. He's the type of character that I could have seen, leading a horde out of the lands north of Zental Keep towards Shadowdale. He's the kind of leader that you could have seen mustering the next orc horde out of the north and marching towards Waterdeep. He always struck me as that sort of almost like the lawful evil paladin type, who's sort of the antithesis of the good guys, who is inspiring, he isn't charismatic, but he's also a monster who rules by fear, and he could just drag entire hordes and shape the course of Faerunian history. That may not be exactly how Ed would have portrayed him in his campaign, and we certainly didn't know much about him before all of a sudden he became the Bane replacement and then replaced by Bane. So we kind of didn't get to see all the potential he had, but I thought he had great potential sort of as that mythic elder evil almost kind of character that really could have been the penultimate challenge for your heroes as they became epic level characters.
And that is indeed how I envisioned him when I created him. It was one of the few big baddies that the powerful NPCs could battle. You could have your Marvel superheroes battle. and that's who you'd use, not an avatar of a greater deity.
Yeah, that should be more intangible to me. The greater deity should be more forces of nature, in a sense, even where nature could be magic or the darkness or loss or storms. He was more earthly and concrete, but still mythic and powerful.
Yes. Waha.
So just bring him back to life and have him lead the next orc horde out of the spine of the world. It's coming. I tell you, it's coming.
Like winter's coming. Look out.
Oh yeah. I mean, like,
yeah. You see, that doesn't work for Canadians. You know, somebody says winter is coming, and they say, yeah, so.
Yeah. Down here in Florida, it's like it's 80 degrees in the winter, so it's a stark contrast. Sure.
Yeah.
We should actually talk about orcs though a little bit.
And that was part 2 of the interview with the Old Mage with special guest of Eric Boyd. Stay tuned for our next episode. Will be the finale of this interview. And hope you enjoy. Until then, keep playing in the realms.